Okay, welcome back. How many can see through time yet? I'll tell you, like the iPhone is going to be amazing, and don't buy stock in Apple anymore because it's going to be bad, I can tell. So our next speaker is Sonja Heinen, and take it away.
Cool. So it's always quite special to see a room from this perspective, and stoked about this opportunity to steal the next 30 minutes of your time. Whenever I'm not at a conference or on a stage, I live in Berlin. It's an amazing city. You should totally come visit, and if you do, please get in touch. I'm always keen to chat about weird socks, for example, or farming, especially natural colors and shapes of eggs. We could also chat about sports, but only the ones I invented myself, such as selfie stick fencing. Family is a good topic too. I have a twin brother, so if you want to know what that's like, feel free to come and speak to me about it as well. So by now, you've probably all figured out I'm a designer, and I hope you've gotten to know me a little bit. Maybe this helps. So some say a picture is worth 1,000 words. If we believe that to be true, this slide should introduce myself as a person more effectively than a text of 4,000 words ever could. But is this number accurate? I asked myself, and then I asked Google. And it turns out that a Google research group developed a machine learning system that automatically produces captions for images that it has seen for the first time. So with this example, the best way to describe this image would be 2 pizzas sitting on top of a stovetop oven. That's 10 words, not 1,000. So, what? Awesome. So I thought it needs some further investigation, obviously. And for its next experiment, I went to the Google image search and put in 1,000 words to see what the results are. And where did I get the words from? Obviously from the Ruby 2.2.3 standard library documentation. And it turns out 1,000 words from that text look like Eric. I'm not even kidding. This is, well, almost, because queries are limited to 32 words, but still. So phrases such as a picture is worth 1,000 words obviously live on exaggerations to make their point. But my takeaway here is that there's an interesting and maybe relevant challenge to figure out what the differences are between images and text and the informations that are represented within either one of these forms. So the plan for today is to introduce you to the visual cortex, also known as V1, or area 17 of our brains. And furthermore, I would like to discuss 4 perceived advantages, which I found to be significant in the context of this presentation. In the end, I will try to make a case for the inclusion of visual languages in the realm of software documentation, and by presenting a range of more or less successful applications where text and visuals meet each other. Right. First, drawing is learning through observation. So just by taking the time and looking at something closely, it creates knowledge already. And then translating the details that we have observed into a hand movement that manifests itself on a sheet of paper creates a deeper understanding of the object that we've been watching. Someone who's excelled at the craft of drawing is Leonardo da Vinci. And apart from creating world-renowned paintings that people queue hours for to see, he also dedicated a lot of his craft to the illustration of proportions and structures which is essentially a scientific foundation for his art. And there would be a lot of projects worth highlighting here, but the one book that I want to focus on, and he was involved with creating, was a book on mathematics called The Divine Proportions. It was written by an architect, Luca Pacioli, around 1498, and Da Vinci created sophisticated diagrams that helped to illustrate and popularize contemporary concepts of geometry inside of that book. So particularly, the mathematics of the golden ratio were very interesting to me. And while some of you may have heard of the golden ratio, yes, few, I'll briefly run through an example, okay? So, in this case, the ratio is created by dividing a line into two unequal sections in such a way that the ratio between the whole line and the longer section is equal to the ratio of the longer line to the smaller one, which comes up to approximately 1.6. That's great. We can use this ratio now to create well-balanced shapes, such as triangles, spirals, and all other kinds of amazing shapes. In the field of design, we often use it to create page layouts and font characters, for example, but also it serves as a foundation for logo development. And even more importantly, the golden ratio helps us to interpret the relationships between different objects. For example, the way in which plants grow and the gender balance within beehives. It's closely related to our perception of beauty, especially of eyebrows, and also the shape the Milky Way is made. So one reason why this concept works well is because our brains are pre-wired to seek out and find patterns, and this applies to single objects as well as to entire scenes and environments. So there's a remarkable phenomenon in our visual system known as scene perception or scene gist, and it allows us to instantly form a spatial representation of an environment and grasp what it means, the gist of the scene. And it also activates our already stored knowledge and thus lets us make predictions about the objects and that are likely to be found in an environment. Do you recognize this thing? No Game of Thrones fans here. Okay. So when researching this topic of scene gist, it reminded me of UML. And I'm assuming most of you are more familiar with UML than I am. But for what I know, UML is awesome, simply by being something visual in the realm of software documentation. And it is also managed by the Object Management Group, and that's just a stellar operation. Sorry. So I have been told that UML is not very well used in the industry. And that's shocking. So it has so much potential. I came across this company website, and they promote a range of 26 design elements to rapidly create drawings of flowcharts. And that's pretty useful, but let's add some awesome. This is a collection of elements whose shapes and colors as well are based on the golden ratio. And with this, we are able to make UML even more awesome than it already is. Right. When the hare arrived at the top of the hill, the hedgehog called out to him, "I'm already here." The hare, beside himself with excitement, shouted, "Let's run back again." So this little conversation snippet is from a Brothers Grimm fairy tale, The Hedgehog and the Hare, in which these two race against each other, and unexpectedly the hedgehog wins, but just by foul play, and resulting in the hare dying from exhaustion in the field. In a way, I find this story makes for a good analogy of our relationship with innovations in tech. The only question is, are we the hare or are we the hedgehog? So while my next part focuses on advances in technology, it's going to be less gloomy, I promise, but about speed. So the area 17 is the place in our brains where information from our eyes arrives. And for a long time it has been underestimated as a rather passive region of the brain. So it merely would statically filter the vision, it would statically filter only be able to detect objects, but the more sophisticated processes such as learning, recognition, prediction, and cognition, that would happen in other parts of the brain. That was the assumption. But remember scene gist? Our brain's ability to get the meaning of a scene in just one instance? Well, it only takes 13 milliseconds for us to do that, and that too happens in area 17. So how does humans' visual intelligence hold up compared to technological eyes? 150 years ago, the first camera took about 8 hours to make one picture. And today there's a camera, it's claimed to be the world's fastest, and it's taking photographs at a mind-boggling 4.4 trillion frames per second. At some point between 150 years ago and today, photography enabled us to capture objects and reproduce them on a mass scale. So, and that comes with the ability to use it for different purposes. One is documentary photography. It is generally used to chronicle historic events or everyday life, and it's usually a long-term kind of project and follows a complex storyline. So generally speaking, the pictures in documentary photography are made with a purpose. Secondly, photographs can influence behavior, and the advertising industry was quick to realize that imagery is an effective way to sell products, more than static plain text. And finding the right motives as well as light setting, perspectives, can trigger strong emotions in the viewer, say, buy stuff. And thirdly, photographs are widely and actually wildly used for communication. With a wave of camera-enabled phones, we create definitely more content that we can ever consume. And I think one of the reasons why Instagram and Flickr are successful, for example, is because they help users to deal with visual information. They've been building the environments for photographs to live in. As with images, there are technologies that influence the visual components of written words, namely typography. And good typography is measured by how well it reinforces our message. In addition, it has an effect on the mood and cognitive performance of a reader. And so in order to write a document that has a positive reading experience, it's probably best to get these things right. So there are 4 most important typographic choices that we can make. So the first is the font, the point height, the line spacing, and the measure, which is the line length. And there are, well, over time, experienced typographers came up with very specific rules and guidelines that can make reading more enjoyable and faster, so you don't have to come up with this stuff yourself. So now that that's settled, is there an equivalent living environment for text or documents? Like Instagram, but for docs. And my own tribe is Ruby, more or less, and I know of Ruby docs. I don't know what to think about it really, but I wonder whether or not it would be worthwhile to take a closer look at, for example, user engagement practices at popular social networking services and apply them to the existing docs infrastructure. Well, double dot, hyphen, right parenthesis. Smiley face. One phrase of 3 characters, 2 different messages. So what this little experiment was supposed to show is that the mere presentation of information is not sufficient for the purpose of communication. Particularly in scientific writing, what really matters is whether or not the majority of the reading audience accurately perceives what the author had in mind. And this can be quite a tricky challenge. So in the course of history, communication has gone through 3 distinct phases, from oral to text-based to image-centered. And each phase comes with a specific set of methods and properties that impact the way communication works best. So if you participate in a conversation, we should try to figure out what the implications of the situation are and how to make ourselves understood. Unsurprisingly, excellent communication skills are hard to come by, and regardless of the medium we use, voice, text, code, or a conference presentation. So the key to successful communication seems to be bound to emotions. As seen by the example of advertising practices, emotions can trigger specific and planned reactions in people, and they can further help to build trust and intimacy between conversational partners, which does not necessarily have to be a deliberate undertaking. We are generally quite good at figuring out who we vibe with, and that comes down to our natural emotional intelligence. So in the context of digital exchange, however, this intelligence fails, because face-to-face conversation comes with gestures and mimics that give us a lot more information than just a plain message. And these clues are gone when you type a message into our phone. Luckily, there are emoji. And in Japanese, I literally means picture and muji means character. So according to the creator, they are a little ugly on purpose. He always envisioned emoji to be symbols that are letters and wouldn't feel out of place if you slip them into a text message. There are a continuous growing number of spin-offs and add-on applications popping up everywhere. For example, a Tumblr called Emoji Narratives that gather poetry that's floating around the web. Emoji Dick is the official translation of Moby Dick in digital language emoji. It was actually added to the board of something in Britain, so don't worry. It goes even further. There's someone who created an online interpreter for an emoji-based list. And the Endgegner, so the final villain, I'd say, of autocorrect systems is Emojimo, which is unsurprisingly auto-replacing words with emoji. There's only one thing left to do, and that's emoji docs, right? So I'm scared to say it, but I prepared some emoji expressions for a few terms related to software development and documentation. So if you're ready, we can find out and see if these works. Well, the first one is kind of simple, I'd say. That's a bug, yeah. I'm so sorry. Shotgun debugging. So the next one is a little bit abstract, I'd say. Anyone? Yeah, almost. It's a pastel theory of programming, obviously. And due to time, I will just give you this one away. I think it's not feed your cat, it's a runtime error. This one doesn't need translation, obviously, but wouldn't it be cool to have a set of emojis for dogs? Right. So side by side with emotions, there's storytelling that fosters our engagement with content. And for over 27,000 years, telling stories has been an essential, and I'd say, most compassionate way of communicating. And for a while, it has been the only method available to transfer knowledge from person to person. Now, the story of visual storytelling and essentially infographics would fill an entire series of presentations But hence today I would like to focus on one particular format, and I'd like to kick this off with a story of my own, which is this one. So earlier this year I decided to give programming a serious go. Since I'm mostly a designer, JavaScript would have been the obvious choice, so I can combine my design skills with front-end development. But then it happened that I walked into a Rails Girls workshop, and when you do that, you meet Ruby. When you meet Ruby, you meet Y, the Lucky Stiff, and his book, The Poignant Guide to Ruby. And do you know The Poignant Guide to Ruby? Not in cases, it's good. It comes with a comic set of 2 cat characters that are a little bit nuts. And after reading the first 2 lines, I was sold. And it's quite impressive for, just having a book that kind of defines what programming language you get into. So while these comics add atmosphere and fun, they are an accessory, and essentially the text would still be readable without them. So with graphic novels, it's a different story. I like to think of them as the adult version of comics, and the range of topics is extremely broad. Guy Delisle wrote the book Jerusalem, and it's foremost a travel memoir of his year-long trip to Jerusalem. And the book also depicts his frequent encounters in the political conflicts. I highly recommend you check this out if you're in your favorite bookstore the next time. It gets even more serious though. Within the practice of documentary drawing, images are made to interrogate a diverse range of themes, meaning that artists actively use drawing as part of their research. Outcomes are not a redundant representation of what they see. It's something, it's a piece of evidence from this investigation. And the online platform, I found an online platform that has some best practices, and the slide shows a scene of Richard Johnson while on a field trip during the invasion of Iraq. So the entire series of images is labeled under Afghan reportage and depicts Richard's 3rd trip into a war zone as an artist. So in his own words, nothing has changed much over time, so Afghanistan is still a country that you can never relax in. And obviously that's a fairly stressful environment to work in. The sketches have a way of capturing this stress. And I find this fascinating because it gives the viewer freedom of interpretation, and it somewhat counteracts the boredom we have when we read about conflicts. I would like to end this part with a quote from Richard. It says, "Being there and seeing it for myself is the whole point." Which is kind of nice because it brings us round full circle to my initial remarks on observation. So what have we learned since then? Images enhance the instant comprehension of object relationships and scenes. Is it applicable? Well, I'd definitely say so, looking at this. And the effort when creating diagrams that are nicer to look at from the beginning is actually quite low. So if you have a set of elements, design elements, you can actually reproduce them quite easily. Technologies can improve the appearance of text, but also create spaces for humans to engage with the content. So user engagement is a tricky thing. It's actually very possible, and if we take social networking services as a benchmark, it gives us a heads up in which direction to maybe move forward. Emotions influence the success of communication, and the integration of emojis would actually be very, very easy because there's a lot of software, a lot of services out there. Is it useful? Maybe, but then again, that really depends on who your audience is, right? Who reads your docs? And they are widely used, so there must be something to it. Visual storytelling motivates us to read and engage with content. Is it applicable? Admittedly, it would be a lot of effort to create a graphic novel like that, but I'm convinced that the effect would meet the effort that you put in. So, how is this going to help you when you sit at your desk writing the docs, right? So the best advice I have for you is an honest call for collaboration. Just imagine a writer, a designer, a typographer, and an illustrator walking into not a bar, but an office, and writing and drawing the docs of the future. I'm not sure if this already exists though. I would like to see the rise of a professional field of technical illustrators. With the help of them, it would actually not be so far away to create graphic novels in the end. So with that being said, I think I'm approaching 30 minutes on the dot, German style. I work for two great companies, Odin and Magic Labs. Please check them out, they do a lot of good and allow me to be here. And with that being said, thank you so much, not for listening, but for looking at these slides with me.
Awesome. I love the idea of like graphical man pages. Wouldn't that be the best thing ever? Yeah, I'm going to make that happen. Is this on?
It was.
Okay, yeah, it is. So we've got a 10-minute break, and you can come up and talk with her, and she will be probably right here, or not. Yeah, anything is possible. So yeah, in 10 minutes we'll come back. No, it is not lunch. Turns out you don't have to eat lunch at noon. Who knew? So, all right, see you then.